Welcome, everybody, to the third episode of the Trainers Mails podcast. My name is Blake, and I'm joined once again by my lovely co-hosts, Mitch.
Hello.
And Jordan.
Hello.
This week, we're going to take a look at the regionals that just happened in Brazil. We had a bit of a disaster trying to pronounce the last regionals, the Champions League in Japan, and this one's even worse again.
No, it's Goiânia. It's fine. It's Goiânia.
It's Goiânia.
Yeah, sure.
Goiânia?
Goiânia.
Yeah, this is why we tried to avoid it, because there was an accent in it. It's tricky. Other languages are hard.
I'm not going to try.
Yeah. We'll just say the Brazil regionals that just happened. But it was a very interesting event. Surprisingly, it wasn't an official one, but we did get a stream to come out of Brazil. So we were able to see a handful of the matches that were on the stream. Bit of lower quality than we're used to, because obviously it's not official, but any quality is better than nothing at all, which we can guess from being Australian and not getting any coverage of our own for our regionals and stuff like that. So a little bit envious of them being able to get something set up and streamed to the wider audience so that people can see what's going on over there, because we had a very interesting top 8.
A little off topic, but have you guys watched any of the old Pokemon streams from 2015 and before? Because
back when it was Top Cut.
Well, we watched the Worlds finals from some of the previous Worlds the other day, and watching 2015 Worlds finals, the quality is so crazy compared to now. It's actually insane that it was that bad.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I remember the first ever Oceania International Championships, which is a defunct event now, obviously doesn't exist. But the first one of those, the stream, was streamed from Facebook or something, like a camera phone that was pointed at the screen inside the venue that was showing a game that was being streamed to no one.
Yeah, and it was on a slightly it was on a raised platform, and it was on a projector screen at the back of the room, and you could kind of barely see it. And it was and it was the first OCIC that was funny.
OCIC 2017, because I was one of the stream games, and I'm happy it didn't get shown because I got wrecked by Gyarados.
You got destroyed. What were you playing?
That was
in
the one,
tournament, Jordan.
I played Eveltal Zoroark.
Was that the one, the Pedro one?
Yeah, well, I think it was
Yes.
I think it was the Volcanion one because there was lots of
Volcanion versus
Volplume.
Pedro Torres beat Pablo Misa in the final.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Which is kind of relevant, because there's a lot of LATAM representation in that finals for OCIC, and we're looking at a LATAM regionals.
What a segue,
here.
mate!
What a segue!
If we had the capacity to do audio clips, there should be a round of applause playing right here, because that was an incredible segue. Well done.
It's cool. Got the hang of this.
Great segue, Blake. Woo!
Really getting the hang of it. But we're seeing decks that were, well, the one deck in this top 8, I would say you would categorize as untiered altogether in the form of this second place Palkia deck. Quite a surprise, honestly. This entire top 8 is wild, because there's not a single Lost Box variant or Giratina variant in there at all.
What a dream.
What a dream. What a time to be alive.
The only deck I'd expect to see there is Gardevoir, pretty much, and there's one.
Yeah, it's pretty...
And the Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon's been seeing a lot of success lately.
But before, a month ago, I would have said the top 3 decks of this relatively well-defined format was Gardevoir, Charizard, and Lostina.
Yeah. Only one of them managed to make... Yeah, no Charizard either is also crazy.
Yeah, that's pretty full on.
We see a good chunk of them, they just all lost their winning in, by the looks of it. All the Tinas, lost to random stuff, and then Charizard lost to, Roaring Moon and stuff like that.
And then we've just got,
And then there's no Mew, and there's just a Clorf. There's a Clorf in here.
Yeah, scrolling down the page, there is one Mew in the top 56 decks shown on the Limitless page. There is a single Mew that made it.
Yep.
48th, yeah.
Rightly below the Arceus Leafeon version that was floating up there as well.
Well, but there's also like a reversal like Gardevoir Mewtwo floating around, Mewtwo V Union with
Yeah.
the 4 reversals
Yeah,
and
there
like the
is.
Luxray. That's wild.
And another Palkia, so it wasn't the lone Palkia.
Yeah, I think there was like I think that there was another person who played the exact same lists as the person who came second.
Bit
I
of
feel
a-
like I saw in a Twitter
A
post.
bit of a testing group.
Oh, yeah, a small testing group that got together. So let's take a look at this Palkia list because it's the talk of the town, even though it didn't win the event. We've got a 3-3 Palkia line, 1-1 Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX, which it's a card like. When was the last time we saw this in a deck in anything?
Last time I saw this was I was playing it in the London Cup or London Open or whatever it was called at the end of Worlds. That's the last time I remember seeing.
Yeah, I think that's
Calyrex
really
anything.
the last time I saw play. The last result I think it had at a major tournament was literally that Worlds 2022 when it won seniors.
Right. Okay. It won seniors in that.
Well,
in that
like it
tournament,
was a 1-1 or a 2-2 Ice Rider in a Palkia and Teleon deck.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Which is ultimately a better version of the deck that we're looking at here, right? I'd much rather have Inteleon than a Barrel.
Oh, but Barrel's pretty good though.
Yeah, it's pretty
It
good.
doesn't have quick shooting though.
Pew pew.
Quick shooting is pretty good.
But they didn't have Moonlight. Did they have Moonlight Shuriken for
They did.
London?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's in I'm 99% sure they're in the same set, Blake.
They are.
Hmm.
Palkia and Greninja are from the same set.
They kind of work
No,
together.
Almost like
that
they
doesn't
were-
make sense. There's no synergy.
It's almost
I
like
don't
they
see
were
it.
designed to be played together. Although one's significantly more played than the other one.
That's true.
This is a great deck for someone who really enjoyed like the early stages of this format because this is a deck that's largely getting wiped out like post rotation. Like we lose Ice Rider Calyrex, of course. We lose pieces like the Celebrations Mew. We lose Melanie,
Melanie's the
Raihan,
big one.
Cross Switcher.
Mhm.
Yeah, the Melanie, the entire like source of the engine, and then like, but obviously Melanie's like the big one. Melanie was like the whole Pokemon V, pretty much almost entirely
Yeah.
gone at this point.
I think Melanie is the only card that we lose that stops this from being played. I think if it kept Melanie, it could survive.
Yeah, and Raihan was like
The backup.
like Melanie. We have Melanie at home.
Yeah.
That was
You
Raihan.
You need to have one or the other. If you look, the fact that it loses both makes it probably means we'll never see Palkia in a top level contender again.
I don't know.
But
That's true.
what a world that we see like a Palkia box deck see success in this current like metagame. Like outside of stuff like Gardevoir with like cross switcher canceling clone is really good into Gardevoir with Radiant Greninja obviously. So it's like obviously that's something where you have like a good line, a good matchup against. But like, what is the Ice Rider Calyrex doing? Like, what matchup is that swinging? Like, well, like, cause I don't even know what this deck does against Charizard.
Yeah,
Was it just not pairing
I
Charizard?
honestly couldn't tell you. Like, there's so many things in this deck that I'm just not sure about. But
Like, there's a Devo TM in here.
what I
Yeah,
have
Devo
to
TM
as-
is the first thing that comes to mind for Charizard.
what I have to assume is that there's just the strength of Calyrex as an attacker and the strength of Palkia as an attacker, especially if you're not predicting that you're going to go up against it, can sometimes just throw people. So, like, we look at the rest of the field. The rest of the field isn't necessarily lined up nicely to beat a Palkia. Like, I mean, Gardevoir can, but Palkia is pretty consistent in knocking out things on the bench. It can Greninja, it can do that kind of stuff. Roaring Moon can do it, but, like, Palkia can just knock Roaring Moons out, right? Like,
I think Palkia, like Palkia V-Stars are good into Roaring Moon because Roaring Moon hates having to use Frenzied Gouging if it has to, unless it's like the last 2 prize cards. Especially because like I feel like nowadays a lot of the builds are sort of trending away from the emergency jelly or like booster capsule focus of the deck. Even like using the 3 like water energy builds so that they can also use Moonlight Shuriken because that attack's insane and instantly gives you like suddenly a Gardevoir matchup when the deck previously didn't have one. So I think like Palkia could do really well into that deck because Calamity Storm gets very limited usage against that deck.
So the thing that Palkia does into Moon is not only does it force Frenzy Gouging, but it forces Frenzy Gouging and then threatens with Radiant Greninja. I feel like not a lot of decks can do both.
Yeah, especially if they do something like put down Manaphy, but even like chucking 90 onto another moon so that it can't use frenzied gouging is crazy as well.
Puts a lot of pressure on. And it means
Suddenly you have to...
it means that an Ice Rider Calyrex then really can't be dealt with by a Roaring Moon. If it's already got 90 damage on it, then you can take 3 prizes, but you're going to lose 2, and then in all likelihood you're going to get knocked out by the next Palkia that comes up anyway.
Yeah. So if you're in a scenario where you do what a lot of Roaring Moon decks do is power up 2 at the same time, because when the deck runs perfectly it can. So why wouldn't you? Especially when you're discarding a lot of your hands and using Pokestops and stuff like that. Like suddenly you're in a position where one gets knocked out and the other one is rendered unable to use Frenzied Gouging by Moonlight Shuriken.
Mm-hmm.
You have to then find like a Sardas and a Dark Patch Attach or Moltres E-Switch combo to power up a new one. And the deck actually kind of struggles finding new Pokemon to replace it. It doesn't play that much Ball Search. It's pretty reliant on Battle Pass to get all the basics it needs for the entire game down in one go. Otherwise, it's sort of occasionally will draw into with Radiant Greninja and Sardas and Researchers raw draw into them.
Yeah,
it doesn't really play much Ball Search.
You can also kind of board lock Moon if they have 2 Moons in play. You can just Red Gren both of them, not take a knockout, and then just evolve all your Palkias into V-Star and say if you want to take 2 prizes, you don't have bench space for a fresh Moon, so you're just going to have to 2-shot or blow yourself up, which is obviously going to be a very favorable prize trade for Palkia.
Yeah, and obviously, Entei Valiant, you've got the type advantage over the Enteis. Entei needs to keep a large board to do what it wants to do against most decks. It's not playing 60, 70 HP basics to take advantage of with the pings. So that seems like a pretty favorable matchup for the deck.
It's the only thing.
Just
and
the one. Yeah. But those are things that are very easy to just not opt into if you know you're going against that matchup, or stuff that seems harder to accidentally start with against that matchup. So it seems like an uphill battle for Valiant.
As for the Ice Rider, I was just thinking about its uses, because when we saw Ice Rider previously with the Inteleon engine back in 2022, it was kind of mostly used as a one-shot option with Choice Belt, or a combination of Choice Belt and Leon. Let it hit 310,
Mew,
which was a pretty big number back then for Mew, etc. But it's not playing any damage buff cards. There's not obviously we don't have quick shooting. There's no Choice Belt or anything, I don't believe. So the main thing,
no belts,
yeah.
no
So I think the
bands.
main thing that the Ice Rider offers is, well, besides a different weakness, which is pretty decent, I think it's just high HP. It's something that you can attack with into Charizard, for example, that you can actually attack in the late game. It won't get one shot
after you've taken a prize card or 2 as well.
Yeah, so usually you'll be with Palkia, you go into Palkia, and then the first one might get knocked out because it's a 220 HP, so it's pretty easy to kill. You can get Redzarded or something with a Choice Belt. And then the second one, once you've taken 3 to 4 prizes, it'll get one shot by Charizard. But you can kind of go into Ice Rider, not have any other Palkias on your board, and then have something that Charizard actually doesn't have the power to one shot. And that would go for a lot of other matchups as well. It's just a late game attacker when your opponent's on 2 prizes. It's just objectively better than a Palkia V-Star at that point.
Yeah, and obviously it's bad against Roaring Moon for the most part, but you just don't have to opt into it against that deck. So, also Claw for Electrode, it's got efficient attackers into the one prizer, and then obviously it deals with electrodes pretty well. Claw for Electrode seems to be a deck that likes to prey on having good offensive typings against the metagame for a good chunk of its matchups, and the rest it does by being able to vomit out a bunch of one prizes that do pretty consistent damage for low effort. So I can see why that would be effective into that deck. But it came up short. It didn't go the distance, and that's because it played against a deck that not a lot of decks are well prepared for. It lost a Pidgeot control.
Mm-hmm.
Not the control of choice that we've seen in recent memory. It's been a whole lot of Snorlax, but while we see a few in the top 64, Pidgeot control has not been the favored son of the control family. It's been Snorlax, but there's a fair few games of Marco playing this deck on stream, and when it's up and running, it's pretty impressive to watch this deck work.
Yeah, I mean, the deck is still called Snorlax Pidgeot, so despite the fact that it's playing one copy of Snorlax, that's, retreat locking your opponent is still the primary objective of the deck. So it is quite an interesting take that he's choosing to play one Snorlax. I think that is not super uncommon, but I think two Snorlax is pretty common. It's got the Mawile as a pseudo second Snorlax because you're playing Pidgeot, you can actually set up combo pieces. You're actually playing energy cards to declare some choice attacks. It allows you to play cards like the Rotom V, or if you need to go aggressive in the late game and clear a threat off the board, you can attack with the Radzard. So it's the same core strategy as Block Snorlax, but with more options, the game's more in your control, and the biggest plus it probably has over Snorlax is that you can't just tech a card or two. It's not as much of a list check that Snorlax is. You can't just be like, I'm going to play these two cards and then beat you every time.
I'm playing a Minior.
Yeah. Pidgeot is going to actually be able to outplay those tech cards that Snorlax would usually struggle to beat.
Yeah, because this deck plays double turbo energy, so if you knock out a Snorlax with a Minior, then Pidgeot's just going to quick search for a double turbo and knock it out. And it's like, well, now you got to start playing Super Odds if I haven't milled all of those already.
Or you just
Misfortune Sisters.
Or you just Mawile lock the Minior and active for the rest of the game.
Yeah, and Mawile doesn't get knocked out by the Minior, unlike Snorlax.
It'll be like 5-shot and then you penny it.
The picture's not loading for me, but I think it might even resist it. So
it doesn't. It doesn't resist it. No.
It'll take 20 damage. It'll take 4 hits from a Minior, and then you penny it, or you put a Defiance Vest on it, so then it takes no damage.
So it never gets knocked out. I think the other thing it has, over Snorlax, is that it has the option to just go aggressive as well. Like as soon as your opponent's taken a couple prize cards, with Magma Basin in the deck, you can suddenly just okay, my opponent thinks I'm just gonna try and deck them out here, but because they think I'm only I'm just trying to control them and make them deck out, they've not really set up their board to do more than have one attacker. So I can just chuck down a Radzard and take a knockout, and suddenly they have to spend a bunch of resources funding their new attacking option to deal with the Radzard that could threaten 6 prize cards if it's left unchecked by using Penny to reset the effect. But then suddenly, you put that pressure on them with Radiant Zard and they start spending resources. Suddenly the game's back on. Deck out's an option again because they can't just rely on that one tech card. They have to find other more creative options. And I think that's the other issue with this deck for a lot of people is that, what do I do? I think I think there might be in a tournament of that might have 500 so people. I can't remember what the total attendance was for this regional, but a big regional. There's a lot of people and only a handful playing this deck. A lot of people would say, you know what, I'm just going to throw this matchup down the toilet because I don't expect to see many people, if any, playing it, and I guess it's just bad luck if I happen to run into it. But when enough people have reached that consensus, then you're the person in the room playing the one deck that no one's prepared for. And if you're playing well enough with it, and you draw well enough with it, that you can pull off the strategy every time, you might just win a tournament because no one knows how to beat your deck and hasn't play-tested against it.
That's honestly the deck's biggest strength, I think, is that people just don't test into these kinds of things because they think that the game is kind of resolved based on what cards you play in your deck. They think that no matter how much you test the matchup, you've won or lost the game based on whether you brought the right answers to it or not. And that is definitely true for Snorlax. It's less true for Pidgeot, and I think the game is a lot more in the hands of both players. More so the Pidgeot player, because they're the player who gets to search for the deck for whatever card they want every turn and make whatever play they want to make. But it's not as simple as just being able to tech one card and beat the deck. No matter what deck you're playing against Pidgeot, there's probably a line for both players to win, but the other player probably doesn't know what the line is.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing for this version of the deck versus just the block Snorlax version is that if you are a player that's playing a deck that's very aggressive, then you can put a lot of pressure on the Pidgeot version of control early and potentially break them down and beat them. Which obviously makes me personally feel very good, just because I know that there's potentially an out to win the game in the first couple of turns, as opposed to, like we've been talking about, the block Snorlax, which is just, hey, do you have this one card? Because if you do, you win, but otherwise, we're just going to move on and we'll just sit here for 45 minutes. So I think the Pidgeot is really, really interesting in that regard, because if you do have a slow start and your opponent picks up, like, I'm playing Miraidon or I'm playing Roaring Moon or something like that, and I really pop off on my first turn, then enough pressure can be put on to potentially win the game. So I think in a way this deck's almost like a fairer version, which is weird to say considering it can do so much more than the block Snorlax version. But it at least gives, there's at least a give and take in the first couple of turns. And that's where having not tested into it is going to be a big problem. Because what people will do, right, is they'll go, oh, there's a Snorlax. All I need to do is make sure that I sit here and do nothing. And as long as 50 minutes passes and I haven't lost yet, I'll get a tie. And I'm playing a Squovit in my deck, so I can just put that down, and I can just flip my hand to the bottom of my deck every turn, and it doesn't matter. And if you do that against this deck, then eventually it'll set itself up. It'll knock out the Squovit with Pidgeot, because it can, and then it'll start destroying the resources that you need to win the game. Whereas against Snorlax, that might be a potential way to win, right? Or at least not to lose. So that possibly is part of the reason why this deck did so well as well, just because people weren't expecting it to be so proactive, and hence they gave it the chance to get into a winning position.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up Squavit, because that's probably the biggest weakness that Snorlax has over this, is a traditional Snorlax list will literally never beat a deck that plays Squavit. You can literally just put Squovit down and you don't have a win con anymore. All you can do is sit there for 50 minutes and hope that your opponent doesn't beat you in time.
Yeah, and honestly, like, I saw this list, like, after it won and it got uploaded to Limitless and everything. I saw some of the games that Marco played, and it piqued my interest. Obviously, I'd been frustrated by different variants of control for a long time, but this really piqued my curiosity, and it I crossed over to the dark side and I booted up live. I copy and pasted this deck into it and I gave it a run. I think Mitch even spectated a few of the games I ran through with it, just so he had an idea of how, like, less toxic it is by comparison to Snorlax.
Yeah.
Where, like, I played against a Charizard deck where it seemed like I was in control the whole time, but if at any point I chose the wrong line, I would have lost the game, because it's just as simple as, like, finding the right cards, getting down 2 Snorlax and counter-capturing every turn. I actually have to pick the right supporter to assess their hand every turn, deal with Squovit. Do you go aggressive against a specific matchup or do you not? Because it has the option to go aggressive into Radiant Zard if it wants to. The trick with this deck, and it's all credit to Marco who piloted this very well, is knowing what lines to go to with which matchup, because this deck, with all the different attackers and all the different supporters, has, like, a near, like, infinitesimal amount of lines to go through in any matchup.
And that's a really healthy thing for the game, where this version actually rewards both players for how well they play the game. Like, the Pidgey version of the deck means that if you don't play well, then you're probably going to lose, even in matchups that you should be able to should be favored in. Or, like, on the other hand, if your opponent plays well, then you can very easily lose games because your opponent just knew what lines to go for into you. So I think it's very healthy in that sense, and makes for more interesting gameplay where you actually get rewarded for being good at the game instead of just sitting there with a Snorlax and doing nothing for a long time. I do think, however, that the deck does get quite a lot worse going into rotation, just because it doesn't lose that much, but it loses Peonia, which is a pretty big deal because it plays like 17, way more than 17 one-offs, and you don't have access to those anymore. Like, there's no replacement for Peonia.
Yeah, we also lose Sydney as well, which is one of the. Obviously, it gets replaced with an outright. It does get airy, which is what I was going to lead into. This is the other way that we interacted with the hand, but we do lose you do lose an out to messing around with their jet energies and stuff like that against those matchups, which
Yes.
was it was really important for that card. Luckily it was also important for Path, but it's rotating with it, so it's not like
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about the stadiums so much anymore. Right now, and so you can just airy their switches out of their hands and their super odds and stuff like that, which is quite scary, because right now, like, taking a chance on Misfortune Sisters was like the only way you could deal with their pesky item cards, but now it has a more consistent way to do that.
There is nowhere that your item cards can be safe anymore. If they're in your deck or your discard pile in your hand, well, not your discard pile. I guess they're already gone if they're in your discard pile.
They're safe in your discard pile. Don't you worry.
They are safe down there. No one will.
I mean,
no one will hurt them.
that's probably the safest place for them, to be honest.
That's the best place to put them.
It might be like understated, but it does lose Stormy Mountains, which at least this version of the list was playing 2 copies of to help get out the Rotom V, and also to fetch Luxray if you need it for a particular matchup as well. So that hurts it a little bit as well in the consistency area. But Airy is a huge buff to the deck as well.
Yes.
So.
It's weird. It definitely changes because it loses some important cards. It gains some important cards. I'm also curious if I forget the card's called Hand Trimmer or something. The one that
Hand Trimmer.
Like that really nerfs people who just hold on to a huge hand against the deck, and then Chain Ionos. That can definitely speed up a win a lot of the time, especially Hand Trimmer. What do you call it? Combined with Airy in the same turn, bring your opponent down to 3 cards, and then taking the best 2 cards of those 5 that they decided to keep is pretty mean.
Because for those who don't know, hand trimmer, if you're just not aware of the cards so far, it discard both players reveal their hands and then discard. No, don't reveal their hands. They've got more than 5 cards in their hand. They choose which cards to discard and discard down to 5. Mm-hmm. Opponent discards first, I think. So yeah, they get to choose which cards to discard, which means they'll get rid of the worst cards, and then, like Jordan said, Airy gets to find which 2 they really, really liked, and then get rid of those, and then reduce you to 3.
Yeah, it basically reads, pick 5 cards in your hand and discard the rest.
Yeah. But you also have to do it, so you have to play around that properly as well.
Yeah, and
so
that's
you don't
the
have to get rid of too many of your own resources.
Because this deck often has an equally big, if not bigger, hand than your opponent, especially if you're just chaining
instant charging.
Instant charging 4 turns in a row while your opponent's just draw passing. Your hand size is probably going to be bigger than theirs, but at the same time, I would happily trade discarding 20 cards if it meant my opponent was also discarding 20 cards, because I can get my cards back. They can't get their cards back.
Yeah, and also, like, a lot of the cards are matchup specific as well. Like, in the case of, like, Peonia, like, you look at your prize cards and you literally just pick 3 cards that are completely useless to just chuck in the prize cards because you don't need them for a matchup, or you already set up or something along those lines. So, like, this deck has no, like, shortage of cards that it can deal away with once the game's already, like, going along. But yeah, so the only thing I worry about for this deck is, as you know, we've only got one more event before we rotate. Well, one large event anyway. We've got the regionals in Vancouver, which is next week as of recording this.
Very nice.
And then we're pretty much straight into EUIC. Yeah. So looking ahead into post-rotation for this deck, the addition of Prime Catcher into a lot of decks makes me concerned for this version, because a lot of the times you can only afford to set up one Pidgeot, and against a lot of matchups you need to be picking out that specific card every turn. Unlike Snorlax decks, you can't just afford to let whatever's in the active sit there and then just get a backup and then rinse and repeat that every turn. You need to do something different, specific every turn to make a matchup work a lot of the times, especially if your opponent is playing well around your resources.
And there's also a couple new cards that are coming out that I wouldn't say they're direct answers to this deck, but they are definitely cards that I would consider pretty good tech cards for this deck. And they're mostly some of the new ancient cards coming out, one of them being Fluttermane, as a Pokemon that can never get locked in the active, or always ignore the ability of your opponent's block Snorlax. And the other one is, like, both as a tech and as an archetype, the Great Tusk Mill. is always going to be better at winning stall mirrors when you're like a deck that aggressively mills versus passively mills. Is always the aggressive mill is always going to win.
Yeah, exactly. Because Great Tusk just needs to play a supporter and have a powered up attacker every turn. Whereas, if the win condition is just to make sure for control a lot of the times that's not getting 6 prizes taken against you like in a game, but when your opponent's objective isn't to take 6 prize cards, if they're just milling all of your precious resources to help do that against them, you're not gonna hold up to their pressure.
Mm-hmm. Even just milling one
side.
every turn is kind of annoying for them.
Yeah, and this, like, the way that this deck has evolved, it's not really outside of like Giacomo to discard special energy. It's not playing like Crushing Hammers or anything like that, so you're gonna have a hard time, especially with like Professor Sada's Vitality, dealing with powered up Great Tusks milling 4 cards a turn.
And maybe a future build of this deck will end up playing its own Great Tusk and fit in some ancient supporters in there somehow.
Possibly, yeah. I could definitely see it. I mean, it's a 1 prize option over the Chi UEX, and it mills twice as much when the circumstances are filled. So, playing like 1 of the Explorer's Guidance, which is a decent enough supporter in its own right when you don't need to use it to activate Great Tusk, just for early turns, but can also be used to activate the Great Tusk. So that could definitely be an option for the deck moving forward, I think. That's the beauty of like control in this form is the heart of the deck is the Pidgeot, but everything around it is like liable to change.
Like you can it's great.
You can change the core concept around it, and Pidgeot will just fetch it out for you, and make it work. Especially with like consistency cards helping out, like Arven, like the combination of Arven, Forest Stone, and set up Pokemon V's like Rotom and Luminion and the like being around in the format, make it so that getting out stage 2 that are as powerful as Pidgeot EX is pretty trivial. Especially when you only need to get like 1, maybe 2 out a game if your opponent's targeting it down. So, yeah,
I agree with
future
that,
is
for sure.
uncertain for this deck in my mind. I could easily see it being good, but if it disappeared due to the prominence of Great Tusk or like other options, like say Snorlax control, if being all in on Snorlax ends up being better than having a wider breadth of options into a meta game isn't necessary, then I could see this falling to the wayside. But yeah.
It'll definitely be interesting. EUIC will be the big reveal for whether that's true or not. But anyway, I missed hearing Mitch's voice, so I think we should move on to a non-Pidgeot deck so we can hear some more opinions from Mitch.
Well, let's move on to our third place deck, because this is a deck I know Mitch has been testing in the post-rotation format at the very least, and that is Chen Pao Baxcalibur. It netted itself a 3rd placing. Bit of a slightly different approach with this list. Obviously, the core strategy is the same, but the counts are a little bit different in the sense that they're only playing 2 Chen Pao to the standard 3 in more recent lists, doubling down on Iron Hands EX, and playing the consistency option in Luminion V, and an extra lightning energy as well, it seems.
Do they usually only play 1? I thought 2 was normal.
It's interesting. Well, two has been normal, but obviously the Iron Hands is not like usually the Iron Hands is not the focus of the deck. Whereas this Chen Pao version is obviously a little bit more targeted towards getting that Iron Hands going. But it's interesting because the thing that really strikes me about this deck is that it is very, very close to lots of post-rotation Chen Pao lists from Japan. Like lots of those post-rotation Chen Pao lists do only play 2 Chen Pao. So we're starting to move into that kind of environment. And it's also interesting that we're only seeing the Irida and the 1 boss, because that's also something that we are trending towards in Chen Pao decks in Japan. Now, obviously, that's because we've got things like Prime Catcher now, which means that you can search out a Gust with Irida, and Irida's obviously the best supporter to play in this deck. The only other supporter really that I can think of apart from like you might play an Iono if you're really desperate to. But the only other card that you really expect to see in the support lineup for Champ Power post rotation would be Cypher Maniac to help you find extra cards. It's obviously not legal and there's no like equivalent in the current format, so this deck isn't playing it.
I mean, Irida is the equivalent.
Yeah, well, exactly. You're just gonna have to hope that one of the cards you want is a water type. But
Yeah.
I really like this deck. It's interesting because it doesn't have like your Radiant Greninja snipe turns to try and like use your
no cross switches, no cancelling
use
clone
your
at
clone.
all.
Yep, that's not really focused in on that. Instead, saying double Iron Hands is going to be enough. I'm just going to knock these guys out, take 2 prizes, and put enough pressure on that eventually a Champ Power can come in and knock out something big at the end of the game.
Yeah, and 2 Earthen Vessel is something that's a lot heavier count in a pre-rotation list.
Yeah.
It's something you see more commonly post-rotation, obviously, like you pointed out, Mitch. But yeah, I think like I could be wrong about this, but maybe this version of the list has taken inspiration from seeing some, because we have seen like results of the Fukuoka Championship League before this tournament actually took place. So maybe we took some inspiration from the post-rotation list and what's good about it. Obviously, we don't get to get all of the good factors because, Prime Catcher, Code Breaker, and Buddy Buddy Poffin being a far superior battle pass in this deck. It's so good. But obviously, like the consistency that the post-rotation offers with a more simplified game plan, just doubling down on Iron Hands, and obviously how powerful the Ampy Very Much game plan is, especially if you're expecting a field with lots of, say, Gardevoir.
Yeah, if you've got a field which is Gardevoir, Charizard, maybe other Chen Power potentially,
Lost Box,
Frigibax, Lost Box, all those kind of decks, Iron Hands does the job, and this deck's very much leaning into that, trying to get that to happen as frequently as possible, and that would be why you've got that double Earthen Vessel, right? Because the only card that you can't reliably find in this deck is Lightning Energy, and so you'll quite often be sitting there going, man, I wish I just had a way to get it. Well, I can now. Irida, Earthen Vessel, Lightning Energy, off we go, and also, I think it's really good.
The second Earthen Vessel basically just acts as the third copy of Chien-Pao, because half the time you not only, but you use Chien-Pao primarily to suck energy out of your deck to attack with something else. So having just an extra copy of the Earthen Vessel lines up with the lower count of Chien-Pao EX, and then also makes sense with Super Rod, because with 2 Chien-Pao, 2 Iron Hands, and 2 Super Rod, you can kind of just pick whichever one of those 2 is better for the matchup, and then just only use that attacker the whole game, because you've got up to 4 Chien-Pao, up to 4 Super Rod, up to 4 Iron Hands with the double Super Rod. I mean, even more if you were able to line up both Chien-Pao or both Iron Hands with 1 Super Rod. So you kind of, even though it's only a 2 count of each, you can kind of just pick and choose whichever one you want to use for the entire game anyway. It's not like you're giving up on access to Chien-Pao at certain parts of the game. You've got Heavy Ball, you've got 2 Super Rod. You can attack with Chien-Pao every turn of the game still, even with only 2 copies.
Yeah, and like the thing that's great about 2 Earthen Vessel is like for this deck especially, like Radiant Greninja doesn't care about what energy it discards, and for this deck, which is playing for superior energy retrieval, you Earthen Vessel for the Lightning at the start of the game. You can sealed cards the Lightning energy because at the start of the game, it's less likely you'll be able to power up the Iron Hands reliably and fetch it out and pull it off in the right turn. But once the Lightning's in there, it's live for the rest of the game, because then you have access to it with superior energy retrieval, or you can use your second Earthen Vessel to find the other one if it's in deck.
Yep.
So very easily activated. So I like this focus for the list, and I'm guessing based on its result, it worked a treat.
Yeah,
it was a good pick into the metagame.
Absolutely, and the best thing about this is that if you are looking at this list as a potential option going forward, there's literally only 1 card in here. I think I'm just doing another quick sweep. There's only 1 card in Escape Rope that rotates, apart from your Battle Pass, which you can obviously just instantly replace with Buddy Buddy Poffin. It's like a 1-for-1 swap. So there's only that card to change up. It's a pretty solid choice going forward.
And the Escape Rope can be straight swapped for Prime Catcher.
Well, that's true, actually. There you go. So there's 5 cards that you don't even need to think about, and both of them are strict upgrades in this deck. So
it's literally Escape Rope, but you get to choose which Pokemon your opponent promotes.
Yeah, it's perfect. So I've been testing a list that's very similar to this. It's got I think it's got 3 per barrel instead of 3-2, but that's
so nice.
that's a cut that you can potentially make as well. Stuffing around with things like the Cologne, do you need to play it? I've got Kyogre that I'm playing around with. There's other really cool attackers. Like Veluza is a 1-prize attacker that you might choose to use in this
What
deck.
does that do again? I forgot about that card.
I can't remember the exact number. It does like 120 or something like that for 3.
It's got the Hydro Pump numbers. It's 60 plus 30 for each energy attached to it, or 60 plus 20, I believe.
Yeah, something like that. But more importantly, its ability is when it gets knocked out, you move 2 water energy from it to one of your other Pokemon on the bench. So it might even be
similar to the
Pokemon,
Kyogre. Yeah, similar to the Kyogre that returns 2 energy, or is it 3 energy to hand when it attacks?
Yeah, 3 energy to hand. So
not reliant on a Excalibur staying in play to be able to use, whereas the energy stays in play with the Veluza.
And so, if you've attacked with Veluza, and maybe you have, I'll look up the numbers because it could be important. But if you've got an attack where I'm trying to take a massive knockout on something, Veluza gets me the numbers that I need, then they need to choose, do I knock out the Veluza, do I knock out the Baxcalibur? Then knock out the Veluza, then some of the energy stays in play anyway, knock out the Baxcalibur, and this Veluza's coming up to attack again next turn. So, very, very strong card. It does 60 plus 20 more, so you're going to get to 120 for 3. That's where my number came from.
Yeah, and it could be the difference between finding one superior to get a knockout with Chen Power, or having to waste it onto or burn a Super Rod to Shivery Chill for more energies. So it could make or break your resource management for the rest of the game with little adjustments like that as well. Plus, once that's powered up, if your opponent targets down Baxcalibur, once the Veluza goes down, it instantly powers up like a Radiant Greninja. Then you just need an attachment, and you can Moonlight Shuriken after the Veluza goes down, which is great.
Which I think is the best part of that card, because it's just so... It creates so many awkward decisions for your opponent, especially if I'm playing against Baby Roaring Moon or something like that, and I've knocked out one of them, I've got 4 energy on it, 150 damage, takes the knockout. Then they go, oh well, I'm gonna knock this out. I can move this energy to wherever I want it. If I want it to go on Iron Hands, it can. If I want it to go on Greninja, it can. There's so many different flexible options, which is really, really great.
Or even to another 1-prize option like the Kyogre we mentioned earlier, which is a lot better post-rotation than in the current format. But yeah, great. So Chen Power only gets better moving forward with the addition of Cypher Maniac, the Buddy Puffin, and the Prime Catcher. So if you're enjoying this deck now,
it's gonna get better. It's only getting better.
Prepare yourself. And the best part is like Mitch said, you really don't have to put in that much effort to make upgrade your deck to be post rotation ready. You change 5-6 cards, and the deck is more powerful than it ever was before in this iteration. And it's just it's so good.
It's more consistent.
Way more consistent.
So it definitely is achieving the expectations that it kind of set when it came out. We knew it was going to be good, but now we've got a little bit more of a consistent base to work with, and it's one of the only Pokemon that can cleanly knock out a Charizard easily. So that's a positive.
Yeah,
it's probably one of the few decks that objectively has a good matchup in the Charizard, because you can win either by being one of the only decks that can one-shot Charizard, or you can win by just Moonlight Shuriken kill 2 Bidoofs, not Bidoofs, Charmanders or Pidgeys or whatever they have, just start the game up and then never fall behind.
Or going back-to-back Iron Hands into Bibarels or Pidgeots or Charmanders and taking multiple prize cards against those cards as well. So it feels like there's no great line into Chen Pao other than sort of hoping that it still doesn't draw cards well, even though it's got the buff.
Happen.
It still happens for sure, but now they're
just less than before.
And now every time you top deck a battle pass before after turn 1, you actually get to use it, which is handy.
You get a free Bidoof and Frigibax.
Yeah.
Which is outstanding.
That's enough Chen Pao love, I think. We've given it too much praise.
Yeah, let's talk about a deck that's going to do even better post-rotation.
It's still a brick fest.
Let's look at Gardevoir. This deck definitely survives rotation. Am I right?
Absolutely. It doesn't change at all.
Yep. It only loses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I'm looking at
5 cards,
I'm looking at almost 6 cards in a row that it loses.
Yeah, in the Pokemon section specifically, which is brutal because it's all the attackers but like Screamtail and Cresselia.
Yeah, it's pretty grim.
And unless you want to just like go all in on the Gardevoir EX. Obviously, Gardevoir's so potent now, but he relies heavily on the 4 level ball in most every list of Gardevoir to help get those Curlier into play. Or if you won the coin flip and you're going first, you get the Mirage Step off. But this Mirage Step's rotating, and so is Level Ball. So every proactive way to set up Curlier is gone. So now, like post-rotation decks...
Yeah.
Oh, and Fog Crystal. My mistake. I missed another shockingly crucial card for the deck that's rotating. So now the deck has to resort to using TM Evolution to evolve into its Curliers.
And to be fair, TM Evolution is wildly underplayed. That is an incredible engine.
Yeah, it's just somehow at this very moment not good enough because we have cards like Level Ball and great crazy consistency engines, but we lose a little bit of that.
When every deck loses Level Ball, then theoretically that makes TM Evolution more, on par with the other decks in terms of consistency, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But the other thing that can't be understated is this was like, without question, the best deck in the format at abusing the power of Reversal Energy. Reversal Energy is such a strong card, but very specific in that it needs non-rulebox evolution Pokemon to be able to use its effect. And you have to be back behind on prize cards. So it takes a kind of slow deck that relies on a lot of energy, and that sort of was like specifically Gardevoir and like this Brainwave Shiny Arcana Gardevoir that we had from Chilling Reign, is that?
I think so.
The Crown?
I think so.
But yeah, regardless, it's getting rotated anyway. But now that crazy number of being able to accelerate 6 energy with Guard EX and then attach a reversal, boom, you kill a Charizard. Perfect maths. And the Zacian B from Celebrations, which has the same numbers but doesn't need... can't use reversal, but it has the HP to be able to, tack on the extra 3 energy.
It's mostly so that it's a basic.
And that as well, yeah. But you can be ahead on prize cards and still use Zacian.
Yes.
So
it's definitely the win more card. If you want to go aggressive and take knockouts when you're already ahead, then Zacian basically can lock up a game that you're already winning.
Yeah, or establish, threaten 2 very powerful attackers.
Now, there is effectively a replacement for Zacian V in Weirdia, which I believe is still legal. It's not quite as good, but it does hit approximately the same numbers as Zacian for about the same number of energy. Like a 9 energy Weirdia does kill a Zard, just like a Zacian does. I mean, you need to...
Yeah, it's 360.
You need to pivot into it, and then you need to make sure your manual attachment is on the Weirdia, otherwise you're losing in energy effectively.
I think that's the biggest issue that Weirdia... beyond... all of the setup, let's presume that you've set up perfectly fine. The biggest thing for Weirdia is that you always need 1 extra energy than you think you do, because you need to retreat out of the active. So, and you can't then Gardevoir that energy back onto the Weirdia once it's in the active. So yes. you need to have a little bit more energy available, or otherwise those attacks aren't doing quite as much as you need, and sometimes that can be the difference.
Yeah, because Weirdia V is relying on its ability to accelerate energy to itself when it moves from the bench into the active position, and then its attack does 40 times for each energy attached to it.
Although there is
Psyshield Bash.
Yeah, there is one thing that Weirdia has going for it over Zacian, and that is the fact that the damage doesn't go on the Weirdia, it just goes on wherever you choose to spread your damage around on the board.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's games when you want to take a big knockout with a Zacian, and you're like, oh wait, this doesn't work because if it's not for game, my opponent wins the game by doing 40 damage. Like that little Charmander on the bench ends the game and has checkmate on me because I can't take a knockout without leaving a Pokemon active that has 30 health or less on it, basically. Whereas Weirdia gives you an attacker that can one shot and also not die to literally anything.
Yeah, so they definitely have to take... I think that's aside from the obvious, Level Ball, Fog Crystal, the consistency engine, losing Mirage Step, what the attackers you're working towards overall are, just a little bit clunkier to use, Screamtail and Drifloon, which had been passed up because we had the better options of Gardevoir and Zacian V. for each damage counter on it, it does 30 damage. Kind of similar to Roaring Scream, except Roaring Scream can target a bench Pokemon. So they need big hats on them in the form of Bravery Charm, Luxurious Cape, or the new A-Spec Hero's Cape to help buff their HP so that they can take enough damage from Gardevoir's ability so that they can take knockouts on the more meaningful EX Pokemon in the format. So it's just that little bit more inconsistent and also vulnerable to Lost Vacuum.
Yeah, but don't get me wrong, like Gardevoir definitely still functions. It obviously changes a lot. It uses new attackers, as you said. Drifloon is the main one. Screamtail, Cresselia's still around, which isn't bad. But the main thing is that even if Gardevoir didn't lose these cards, like the Shining Arcana Gardevoir, it still is being introduced to a lot of new archetypes that are going to be problematic for it. Mostly there's the single prize Rory Moon deck. Typically Gardevoir pretty favored into Rory Moon because of the prize trade, but when you swap the...
Yeah, because there's no one prizes in Rory Moon, right?
Yeah.
When you swap the 220 HP, 230 HP 2 prizer for a effectively 200 HP 1 prizer, that's a lot more awkward for Gardevoir to deal with. Then you've also got the potential uptick in Iron Hands with the release of Iron Crown, and then also Iron Crown meaning that a full HP Arcana Guardi, if that still existed, would die to an Iron Hands anyway.
Yep.
And then, of course, the fact that all of your attackers now are going to theoretically just drop to a Lost Vacuum if you're getting the full use out of them. So,
and also vulnerable to just regular old Iron Hands, buffed or not.
Yes, absolutely. But like, obviously, you're going to see more Iron Hands with Crown. So there's a lot of weaknesses for Gardevoir. I think the deck still functions, and I think this might be a bit of a hot take, but I think the Gardevoir EX card will be back as a Tier 1 card eventually because the ability is so broken. And I think at some point in the next 2 or 3 years it's legal, they're going to bring out a good Psychic Pokemon that's going to make it Tier 1 relevant again.
Yeah,
there's no way they're going to be able to avoid a good Psychic Pokemon that scales off number of energy for that long.
Yeah. I definitely see this as a kind of like a Rapid Strike Urshifu type of card, right? Like it got released, it was very, very strong, the meta was good for it, and then things kind of shifted. The set afterwards, Mew came out, Rapid Strike Urshifu got worse and disappeared. And then eventually came back as this kind of niche, meta-relevant Tier 2 kind of deck that could, you'd take down your NAIC every now and then just because it has a good run on the day or the meta lines up for it. So Gardevoir will eventually be back in some way, shape, or form because the cards that make up the core Gardevoir line are just too good. Like, Curlier is an exceptionally good card. Trade is very, very good. Gardevoir EX is such a useful ability. The attackers that go with it at the moment are fine, but there's just nothing that's pushing it over the edge. So just wait until they bring out a basic with 250 HP that does expandable damage, and then suddenly Gardevoir's back.
Yeah, you're definitely not selling your Gardevoirs. You're putting them in a safe place where you can come fetch them out when the time comes.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it can still be good now if the meta's right for it. I think it bodies Lugia. I think it's probably at least decent into Zard. Probably not as good as it used to be because Drifloon with Brave Charm, I think, caps at 300. So you need to like Moonlight Hill to put it on odd increment or use Hero's Cape or something to reach Zard numbers, which isn't that unreasonable to do, but it's a bit awkward.
But then it's a 2-prizer.
No, sorry, I meant the A-Spec tool.
Oh, the Hero's Cape.
Yeah,
right,
Hero's Cape.
My mistake.
I mean, that one works too if it's for game. Or even just trading evenly. But yeah, like I think there are metas where Gardevoir can do well now. There's definitely good matchups that it's favorable into. It's just that there's also it's got more bad matchups than it's used to having.
Yeah, it's not the ever-present solid Tier 2 deck or Tier 1 deck that it has been for a long time.
Yes.
It lost a chunk of its attackers, a lot of its consistency, and then the meta game it now rotates into is far less favorable than it was before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's still like, oh, maybe.
Yeah, because it's that good.
Yeah.
But I think definitely when we lose refinement, because I don't think I don't think refinement will survive another rotation. I think we'll rotate up to Scarlet and Violet next time. So
Okay, so
having
it's on a clock to get something good then.
It's got a year.
it has a year. I think because unless we get another good Curlier between that time.
If they bring out a broken enough psychic type Pokemon in the future, then they can probably get away with playing it without refinement, but like it'll be
and then it's probably played closer to like a Pidgeot Charizard line where it's it's the thing that powers up the good things and not like a steady build up, or the Baxcalibur, exactly. But yeah, so a deck that almost entirely changes come rotation is Roaring Moon. Right now, this deck is 4 Roaring Moon, 2 Moltres V, a Morpeko, a Mew-EX, a Squawkabilly, and a Radiant Greninja. I think 2 to 3 of those Pokemon stay in the deck post-rotation. You play at least 1 to 2 copies of Roaring Moon-EX post-rotation. We lose Galarian Moltres in the rotation. You replace Morpeko with the baby Roaring Moon, because outside of being able to power up an EX at the same time as leaving like a free retreat pivot in the active, the deck doesn't really require that anymore, because you can just sort of go aggressive with the baby Roaring Moons that scale up and damage as the game goes on. It might still play a Mew-EX, like Mew's Great Draw Engine, and a good attack that you could energy switch on if you.
Well, it's not going to play energy switch now that Moltres
probably
rotates,
not.
Right?
Probably not.
I think that's probably the biggest loss it has, is the fact that it can't use energy switches effectively as it used to.
And like Squawkabilly X, if you don't have the Direflame Wings energy switch combo and you lose your go-to V Pokemon to slap a Forest Seal Stone on, opting into a turn 2 Calamity Storm / Frenzied Gouging isn't viable anymore consistently.
Yeah.
And it's more reliant on using Sardas, which this version of the list is only playing 1 copy of, because your 4 E-Switch and Direflame Wings is so potent. Between the attach, energy switch, and finding a single dark patch with Forest Seal, Pokestop, and Squawkabilly and Mew, and all the different draws, it's quite easy to find that. But suddenly, just the loss of the Moltres and the Forest Seal Stone, and because of the pivot of the deck from that into the one prize effort, suddenly you start cutting these cards like the Mew-EX and the Squawkabilly X, because you don't require the aggressive start. You can play a more laid-back game plan, still obviously with the option to go aggressive. You still want to try and get like turn 2 attacks onto enemy Charmanders and Frigibacks and Bidoofs and all the other little baby 60-70 HP Pokemon that are going to be running around, because that's where the base damage starts for the baby Roaring Moon.
You absolutely can still attack with Frenzy Gouging turn 1. Like, we used to Night Spear turn 1 pretty consistently just by going double Dark Patch attach, so it's definitely, if you go second and have 4 Sardas Vitalia, it's not a stretch to reach, it's just a lot harder.
Yeah, just a lot harder. Especially if you have cut the aggressive draw options, because it's less likely. So
because you can't research into effective 8 Dark Patches with the energy switches as well, Starter becomes the significantly better supporter, and then you're just naturally going through a lot less cards in your deck.
Yeah, because the current iteration of Roaring Moon goes through like half of its deck in the first turn, between playing like you concealed cards, you try to Ultra Ball down to a range where you're using Restart to draw a couple cards. Then your hand's practically empty, and there's Dark Energy left in it. You use Squawkabilly X, and then you research, then you Pokestop, and then hopefully at some point you've got a Galarian Moltres and a Forest Seal Stone attached to it. If you haven't hit it yet, you can Forest Seal Stone for it. And then you just start slapping down Dark Patches here and there, attaching, and Trekking Shoes as well, if that wasn't enough. Earthen Vessels thinning out like 2 cards every time you play it.
And then you
synergize with those cards.
You end your turn by playing Pokemon Catcher to see if you immediately win the game.
Yeah.
You flip the coin.
You flip a coin, and then you decide if your opponent wants to go first or second in the next game.
Yeah.
Maybe you flip 2 coins if the first one doesn't go well.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you Forest Steel for the third.
Yeah, just flip as many. Flip them all. Flip 4. Flip 4. What do I care? Just flip them all.
I mean, if it gets you the knockout and their only attacker, then
Yeah,
takes the
that's
first
fine.
two prizes.
If you're trying to knock out a lone Ralts on the bench and it's about to Mirage Step and Catcher just instantly wins you the game, you might be able to find 3 of them and flip 3 tails in a row. That's not what happened to me. But yeah, this is like apart from Vancouver, this is like the last ride for Roaring Moon as it stands now. It's about to have an extreme makeover.
And it's going to get way better as well, I think.
That's the argument. Does it get worse or better? It definitely gets slower.
It's different. It's different, but I think the deck becomes way more interesting. Right now, Roaring Moon as it stands.
Sure.
Right now, Roaring Moon as it stands is not a deck that I'm particularly into, which is weird because I'm usually into hyper-aggressive decks, and this is as hyper-aggressive as you get. But
I think it's a little too hyper-aggressive.
It's just it's too much. It's too much, man. Like, just settle down.
You really need the zoomies for this deck because it's funny. Like when you don't really notice it until you play against it as not the Roaring Moon, but you need to like put in like a coffee order and just go take a minute because their turn like doesn't really interact with your board, and then it takes like 10 minutes for them to draw half their deck and sequence their cards right before they power up their Roaring Moon to take a knockout on your 2 prizes.
They play 3 turns and it takes them 13 minutes. The first turn takes 12. So
yeah,
and then the game's over, and then you go and get your lunch. It's just the way that it is.
I think the deck is equally good pre-rotation as it is to post-rotation, but the way that it's good changes significantly.
Yeah, I agree.
Because the matchup spread changes because now the focus is on the 1 prizer versus the 2 prizer.
Agree.
You're not taking big knockouts on the EXs with the new version of the deck. You can, but it's not how the deck's designed to be played because with all the rotation changes, like we said, it's not as consistent to do that. So you go with the safer, slowly but surely approach. And 1 prize decks that don't get knocked out every turn are just strong. Like you trade up on them, you get half hit if you've got the ancient booster capsule on you. You've got 200 HP on a 1 prizer that can output like later on in the game over 200 damage. Sometimes even stretching to the lengths of Charizard if you're playing a deck that's all in on ancient Pokemon and ancient cards and stuff like that. That's more of a different deck though. But that card is so potent that like this new version is very strong in very different ways. And so currently, you know, this deck has like almost no matchup into Gardevoir unless it's like killing that lone Ralts or it plays the water energies and does the E-switch Moonlight Shuriken stuff. But the new version of the deck would like auto win the current version of Gardevoir because it's just like you just bench 4 of the Baby Roaring Moons and make sure they're powered.
Yeah, you can't do
and
that.
It's like cool, you're behind, you've activated reversal energy. It's like you want to counter catch up a different Roaring Moon and knock that out for 1 prize. Guys just so used to trading up.
A Guardi X can't even knock out a boosted Baby Roaring Moon.
And it gets knocked out in return because it's dark. So, like, it doesn't need that many in the discard to start knocking out
Honestly,
Gardevoir.
it's probably fair that the dark deck should be Gardevoir. That's probably how it's meant to work.
Yeah. But, like, it's just so funny how much this deck does a complete 180 in terms of its, like, approach. And all it took was rotation to hit.
All it took was Vespiquen.
Yep. Vespiquen with a very similar effect, but only relying on Pokemon being in the discard pile, whereas this new Roaring Moon cares about all ancient cards. So suddenly all cards that just have this little ancient sticker at the top right of the card become instantly a little bit more playable.
Also, just saying that Baby Roaring Moon would be borderline unplayable if Vessel wasn't randomly an ancient card.
Yes, luckily one of the most playable cards in the entire format right now, Earthen Vessel, happens to have the little sticker that says this card's a little bit better than it should be.
It's such
and
a
it discards stuff with is the major synergy for ancient Pokemon in general is just like interacting with the discard pile.
I would play 8 copies if I could.
It's so good. But that's Roaring Moon post rotation. I don't even know if this deck survives rotation. Entei Iron Valiant.
Does
it use Gouging Fire?
Does Entei even survive rotation?
Entei is Brilliant Stars, so that survives.
I know we lost
but it loses Medicham.
Well, like all of these cards, apart from Medicham, survive. But I think the thing that kills
Escape rope.
this deck is that there are better future variants to play with, which means that Valiant doesn't need the fire attackers to go with it anymore. So I don't know if you've been looking into many of the Japanese tournaments that have been happening, but there are a couple of Iron Valiant decks that are popping up here and there, and they tend to just be like kind of strange, twisted versions of the Iron Hands, Iron Crown variant, right? So they're just putting the Valiant in there, and then off you go. You can use your extra pings of damage to deal with that. So that is more the direction that these decks are tending to head in, and it means that your Entei is not like the partner anymore. It just gets left by the wayside.
Well, when you think about it, Valiant is kind of just Crown, but with more steps. They're both a future card that gives you 20 more damage, but one of them I have to awkwardly put into the active, and one of them just sits there and gives me extra damage every turn.
This is true. This is true. If I can put that 20
So,
damage
I
wherever
mean,
I
obviously,
want.
Valiant's a slightly stronger effect, but like in terms of efficiency and like consistency and just how how much you get for your resources, Crown is significantly more value for the resources you put into it, which is 0.
Naught, one card,
just
one deck spot.
Yeah, it just sits there on the bench and does its
One,
thing.
and we also get to see this kind of archetype because you're not playing Entei as your attacker. It effectively gets to keep Battle Pass because it's got what's the card called? Turbo something.
Techno Radar.
Techno Radar.
Techno
That's
Radar.
the one. So like, yeah, so it's cool that there's a deck that isn't little 70 HP Pokemon that gets to keep Battle Pass.
Yeah, it's quite nice that it gets to benefit from that because the big basic Pokemon, it's like Nest Ball and Ultra Ball are pretty much the only way to search them out. Artisan can't target rule box Pokemon. So it's a fortunate thing that it had some specified search for it. It's basically like its equivalent in that deck to like Earthen Vessel in terms of how powerful it is.
And it's also just such a broken card that it's criminal that it hasn't seen play yet, and it's only because Battle Pass is still legal that it kind of got gatekept by that.
Yeah, and the decks that would benefit the most from playing Techno Radar aren't solely relying on future Pokemon like new versions would. So when you've got a deck that's playing like 3 copies of Entei and Medichams and Squawkabillies and stuff like that, 4 copies of Techno Radar don't make sense because you can't search out the other ones. You can only search out the Valiants. But that wouldn't be a problem post-rotation. Speaking of cards that get hit on the backside by rotation, Miraidon. If it wasn't already struggling right now to find a place in the metagame, rotation doesn't seem to help it because it was probably like the premier deck at using Iron Hands pre-rotation. But now,
better ways now,
every other deck around that wants to use Iron Hands does it better. So the purpose of Miraidon doesn't seem to exist anymore because, we keep Raichu, but we lose Flaffy, which is huge. And, I mean, we lose Peony. Peony as well, which is huge because it's currently the way that the deck is. It's the card that this deck has been shaped around because it turbos Iron Hands. It just grab 2 generators, play those 2 generators that you got off Peony, and then use Mew EX to draw back up to 3. Can you hit with it yet? If not, play more cards to keep drawing, like Forest Stone something, Pokestop or whatever.
I also think
Just
that
draw
even
more
if
cards,
even if you
Squawkabilly.
don't look at rotation, Miraidon was already pretty low in power. Like it was already kind of being power crept, and I think that at least for the first set, what's it called? Temporal Forces? Is that the...
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that there's quite a big power spike in Temporal Forces, and there'll probably continue to be more power spikes in future sets, but like introduction of some of the new archetypes and aspects and stuff, I think that even Miraidon at its peak kind of just gets power crept by the new archetypes.
Yeah, absolutely. But I feel like like as soon as like I wasn't convinced that Miraidon before Iron Hands was a deck. Obviously, it did actually like have some success. I think Jesse Parker got like a few great successes where they were still using like the Flying Pikachu V to paralyze stuff in clutch situations and stuff like that. But as soon as Iron Hands released, people were like, this deck that was already like tier 1, tier 1.5 suddenly has this like one of the best new attackers the game has to offer. And it's one of the best at using it thanks to Electric Generator. So the deck like sort of only existed to spew out this attack as often as possible and hopefully find the matchups like Gardevoir and stuff like that really either couldn't deal with an Iron Hands quickly or had a lot of targets for Iron Hands to hit. But now with all of the future synergy with Iron Crown, the new Miraidon, and now that we have the Wish Baton, the thing that accelerates energy from 4 retreat Pokemon to others.
Heavy Baton, was it?
Heavy Baton, yeah. The existence of this deck just isn't required anymore. Like, Miraidon's great for consistency, like tandem units are sick ability, but it doesn't fetch out Iron Crowns, which is what the deck is going to use in its core build moving forward. And
shout out
as a
to
build
Reggie
around,
VMAX that never saw the success it deserved.
Oh, poor old Reggie VMAX. What a card! Just suddenly, and then it comes out, and then there's a great card to set it up, and it's just terrible, and it's not good.
It's funny that you say that, Jordan, because the way Miraidon looks post-rotation looks a little bit like Regieleki.
Really?
Because, yeah, I'm just trying to find the league where I saw it before, but there's it wasn't doing well, but it was in there for sure.
It wasn't doing well, but it was there. It was there.
It's around, but occasionally a Miraidon will show up, and it has the Regieleki VMAX in it, in like a 3-2 or a 2-2 line, and it uses that amp to try and boost it up, because that's plus 30. Iron Crown's is like a piddly 20 damage buff.
You can play both.
Regieleki's plus 30. You could play both. That's crazy.
Imagine your bench is 3 Regieleki VMAXs and 2 Iron Crowns. And then 1 active Iron Hands that carries the game.
Oh, there you go. I say that it won a City League in Miyagi on the 16th. Let's have a look at the list. We have 3 Miraidon, 2 Regieleki,
bonus content,
VMAX, 2 Iron Hands, the free Retreat Zero Aura, Iron Bundle.
Actually, the free Retreat Zero Aura with Regieleki VMAX is very valuable.
That's pretty cute.
That's very efficient.
And let's see. Outside of that, it's playing like Prime Catcher and a copy of Emergency Board. Those are like the only new cards in the list. This, like, Prime Catcher's like the only like super impactful new card.
So we can
Otherwise,
play this
it's just
at
like
league
using.
tomorrow.
It's playing 2 copies of Experience Share to try and make up for the loss of Flaffy in rotation, which is one of the bigger hits to the core concept of Miraidon as a deck, because it's harder to stream the attackers when you don't get that free.
Wait, it plays EXP Share over Heavy Baton?
Yes.
Interesting.
Because you attack with more than just Iron Hands.
True.
Because with the damage amp from Regieleki, you can get up to V-star numbers with Miraidon.
Mm-hmm.
And you can knock out with Raikou V on basic EXs and weaker stage 1 EXs as well.
Yeah. Raikou and Entei are still just generally good cards. It's weird that Suicune rotated and those 2 are still around.
I was literally about to bring that up. It's kind of cruel that like these guys, they were all sort of, they were brought in like one at a time, and then randomly like Suicune saw success first, and then it fell off, and then Raikou saw success, and then it sort of still lingered because it's been good in Lost Box for most of its lifetime, and then it's been in Miraidon pretty much the entire time, at one time or another. And then, last but not least, Entei finally got time to shine in Entei Iron Valiant once Paradox Rift came along.
Yep, there was
and
13,
added that key part to it.
13 seconds where that deck was relevant, and now it's gone again.
And now it's gone again.
It is cool that all 3 of them saw success in three very different ways.
I mean, it
despite being
makes
basically the same card.
it makes sense because they are just the same card, right? It's just that they needed the right colors to come along. Raikou was
And
never
a lot
going to
of-
be
they're all
good
just
until yeah, Raikou was never going to be good until a lightning deck came along, and then there was one, so it was
Wasn't-
good in it.
Wasn't there a deck?
A lot of
I think when Entei and Raikou first came out, I think there was like a Lost Box variant that there was like Lost Box dogs. That was just all of the dogs.
I think it was
with grass hair or something.
Ludicolo. I think
Oh,
they
was it
played
Ludo?
Ludicolo with
Okay.
like luminous or rainbow
I
energy or
remember
something,
there
so
was
you
a
could
deck
rondo.
that played all three, and that was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. But over the course of their respective lifespans, there are a lot of Fleetfoot
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
around.
Which one
Lots
do you
of plus
think?
one draws a turn.
Which one do you think will go down in history as the most successful of the three?
I think the best one's Raikou because I can't think
Yeah.
of a moment that Suicune was relevant apart from in Palkia as a Pokemon to attack
You
on
don't
turn
remember-
one.
You don't remember Suicune and Ludicolo being like a tier 1 deck for a few months?
Oh, 6 minutes, yeah, that was relevant.
It was really, really strong for a time there. And it was played in, I believe, the what was it, the Vikavolt V decks. I think Suicune was also played as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
alongside the Raikou, and was pretty strong there as well.
I think Suicune gets an
s-
honorable second place.
Yeah, it's definitely like Raikou, Suicune, Entei.
Poor old Entei.
Um,
Entei had a crack.
Entei, poor guy.
He's a chonker.
It was a long time sitting in the shadows, being like, one day.
Yeah, but he's too much. He's too much of a chonker. He's got through.
He was sitting there with his 3 retreat, but with like 230 HP. It's like, I've got more HP. I've got Magma Basin. Like, why are you ignoring me? It's like, just pay
I think
attention
the
to
reason
me.
is because grass types and steel types are not good.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Yep, but water types and fire types were. So
Yep.
Raikou and Suicune got their time in the light. But poor Suicune's getting left behind, and little bro's getting rotated. And the middle child and the older brother are moving on.
Maybe Entei has a chance to shine in the next year sometime.
50-50 shot. I mean, Charizard's still around to accelerate energy to it. We still got Magma Basin. We got that relatively new support of Mela to accelerate fire energy. There's definitely a realm where Entei sees play as like one of in a deck, but a bigger, older version of it just got printed of it in Gouging Fire. So unless the deck really needs like a Forest Seal Stoneholder, which is a valuable trait to have, it might get overshadowed by that card for the foreseeable future.
Well, it is Entei wearing a hat, so
Yeah, big hat, big scary hat. And from there, like that's the most exciting parts of that recent Brazil regional. From there, we look forward to that that Vancouver
Sorry,
regionals.
I'm going to cut you off there, Blake. You just deliberately ignored Clorf. Like, we didn't talk about Clorf in detail at all.
We could talk about Clorf.
Clorf sucks.
Yeah,
Let's move
yeah.
on. Woo!
Yeah.
I
All right,
think
I'm glad that's
Clorf-
how that went.
I think Clorf is the predecessor to Ancient Box. Ancient Box. It's like Ancient Box before Ancient Box existed.
I like Clorf. I think it's cool. I never bought any of the cards. I have no idea where you would even get a Hisuian Electrode V. But boy, it's an interesting deck.
It says it's a promo card.
Yeah, but
It was a box I never saw.
yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know that I'd be spending $11 on them.
If you've had a Sneasler in a Radiant Sneasler in the binder, and you've been like, I love Sneasler, especially shiny
Yeah,
Sneasler.
for some reason,
then I can play it.
For some reason, I'm a big fan of Sneasler.
Everyone's favorite Pokemon, Hisuian Sneasler.
Dude, I love Weavile. I hate Sneasler. What a dumb Pokemon. That's so dumb.
It's just Sneasler that
It's just a man in a furry suit. Just a lanky dude walking around.
He grew out his fingernails and let his one tuft of hair grow out super long.
Carrying a
and then he
person
just
in a basket up a hill.
in a basket. Yeah.
That's all he's
Just
doing.
kidnapping people and putting them in baskets
All
and
the
carrying them up
Sneasler
cliffs.
needs to be a good design is to not stand up straight.
But like needs to
Oh,
do
if it-
the cool gangster squat that it's doing in the card.
Yeah, like it's just
Yeah,
he
like it's
just
posing
looks
for a
dopey when
band
he's-
album.
He just looks dopey when he's standing up straight.
He's about
For an album.
He's about to drop the biggest LP. Oh, it's gonna be so
Yeah,
fresh.
the hottest LP of 2024 is coming out.
Anyway, well, hey, listen. If nothing else, You've at least got something to put on the thumbnail now. You can just put your Hisui and Sneasler thumbnail up, and then we can move
Oh
on.
yeah. I can chuck like a Beastie Boys like beanie or something on his head or something,
All
and a
you need to
microphone in his
do,
hands.
all you need to do in the bottom left-hand corner, like the whole thumbnail is just the picture of Sneasler, and then in the bottom left-hand corner, parental advisory required or whatever. Just a big black and white sticker in the corner, and that'll do the job.
And like a CD cover like outline
Yeah.
as a border. It looks like a CD case as the thumbnail.
I love it.
That'd be sick. Well, I'm gonna work on that after this is done recording because that sounds like a lot of fun. But all we got now is to look forward to the last regionals in Vancouver, the last one of note before we hit rotation, and then we look towards EUIC.
Yeah, I don't think that this particular region, as much as we've talked about it, this regional will not be reflected in the results of Vancouver. Vancouver obviously will be a much larger event, so some of the outlying decks that we saw in top 8 might not be able to make it through. Like, I don't think he's going to see a Clorf in top 4 in Vancouver. That's my controversial take for the day. But I think the big thing is that, like Oceania, South America tends to have, like... LATAM tends to be a place where people are more willing to play random stuff, and they don't, like, lock themselves into hardcore meta play. Whereas North America is 100%, these are the top 4 decks, you have to play them or beat them, off you go.
Yeah, you have to sweat to succeed in America, so you have to bring the best meta decks and the right one for the occasion, and you have to play it well.
Yeah, so everyone will be sleeving up 59 of the same cards that they've put in their Lost Zone Giratina every time, and then they'll go, man, this time I played the instead of the 4th Jet Energy, I played a Switch, and it made all the difference.
Or a Water Energy.
Yeah,
I'm gonna call it. I'm gonna say that the top 8 decks for Vancouver is 3 Guardi, 2 Lost Tina, 1 Zard, 1 Roaring Moon, and 1 Mew. That's top 8.
Not even 8 decks?
Ooh.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
At least,
that's fine.
at least 8.
That's at least 8.
That is top 8.
There you go. Yeah,
You
that
can
doesn't
reference
sound...
it here.
That doesn't sound
It's,
unreasonable. That sounds pretty much likely. Yeah.
Because this is a North American tournament, I'm going to say that there's going to be a Roaring Moon, 2 Tina, 2 Gardevoir, 2 Chen Power, and a Snorlax if I've still got one more spot left.
Gross.
You do.
Snorlax, bleh.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess...
Americans love Mew though.
Yeah, American.
But Mew never succeeds in America.
Mew is a deck that only succeeds in Asia or in Europe. You can only win when you're on the right side of the Atlantic Ocean. You can't.
I don't know
win
if you've
with
seen
Mew
it.
in North
I don't know if you've
America.
seen it, Jordan, but on the interwebs they spell Mew MEU because it only does well in Europe.
That's funny.
It wins European regionals and then doesn't make top cuts of,
It's
of
Mew's
American
also
events.
big in EU. That's fair.
Yeah.
Maybe Mew's just
So
big
that's,
in general.
That's my prediction.
Well, Mew. This is the last chance. I think this is one of the things that this tournament will likely see happen. You'll obviously get lots of people that are playing the big decks, but you might get a big spike in people playing Gardevoir. You might get a bigger spike in people playing Mew, just because this is the last chance you can actually play them.
Or Rapid Strike Box, a deck that's going to rotate entirely, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I pulled
its entire concept rotates.
I pulled my Rapid Strike Box apart the other day. It was a sad experience. There was like 40 cards that just aren't playable anymore.
Yep.
You have to keep
Got
red
a lot of
Sam.
points with those boys.
Yeah, poor old Urshifu. Poor old Urshifu. I could have.
Urshifu,
It
Intel,
could have been. It could have been me and
Magel,
Azul in that Players Cup 3 final, but for one Victini VMAX.
one Victini VMAX in the way of destiny.
It was literally me, my Urshifu, and a bunch of Pikarom, and I was like, man, I wish this tournament was relevant for anything, because I could win this thing. And a Victini showed up, and I was like, oh, God, gosh darn it, this sucks.
Meanwhile, I got into the losers bracket almost immediately, and then ran through like maybe a dozen Pikarom mirrors with trying to navigate Bolton v Math, and falling to Brent in like top 16 or something of the second
Yeah,
one.
those tournaments were brutal. Losers brackets tournaments are so hard.
It was the Wild West, man.
Yeah.
Players Cup. Those are
Because
crazy times.
I was in the winners bracket of that tournament for pretty much the entire time, and I remember sitting there for like 2.5 hours waiting for losers bracket games to finish so that I could pair.
Come on, you
Guys,
losers!
come
I need to
on.
play more games.
Come on, I'm sitting here waiting. Oh well.
But we've got one last event in this current format to look forward to, and then maybe we see if everyone's super faithful, we just see a top 8 made up of Mew, Urshifu, and Gardevoir.
Yeah.
Because they're all gone post rotation thereabouts. Gardevoir's hanging around.
No, it's not hanging around. Jordan's a dreamer, mate. It's not happening.
He's a dreamer and a Gardevoir believer.
He's a believer.
It'll be back eventually.
Nah, probably not though.
Yeah. We'll see. But we have lots to look forward to in the Temporal Forces metagame. That's what we're going to be looking forward to anyway. We're going to start doing some more proxy testing, using our sims and our different apps to try and get that testing in and try and get our hands on some of the new cards now that we're starting to get some pre-releases come through. I got myself an Iron Leaves from my pre-release. I was pretty happy with that. I only need like 1 to 2 copies of that card.
Nice.
Got to get one of each of the relevant ace specs.
Oh my god, that's gonna be such a pain. This set is like, I don't really like. I can give or take some of these Pokemon, but I also need 5 cards that are all between $20 and $50 each.
Yeah, and just one.
Yeah, just one of them, but I need them. I'm just so lucky that my wife pulled a Prime Catcher out of her pre-release kit, so I don't have to worry about that one. Don't have to worry about that.
I better not catch anyone from our local area going out and buying like four prime catchers out of like the store binders and like the different
they're going
stockpiles. It's like, oh, but I want to sleeve up 3 different prime catchers in my 3 different decks that use it at the same time. It's like, please just re-sleeve it. I cannot find a prime catcher.
Use a computer search as a proxy. It's fine.
But I want 3 prime catchers.
We allow prime catchers. We allow proxies at locals for the first week after we get pre-release. No one's going to be able to get the cards that quickly. So let's not buy 4 copies of all the relevant ace specs so that nobody can find actual copies. Yeah.
Oh dear. The best bit is no one's listening at this point, so they won't care.
They've already put in their pre-order of 4 of each of every ace spec but Neo Upper Energy.
I'll have 12 Master Balls, please. I'm gonna sleeve up my 12.
That card is gorgeous. It's Master Ball. The new Master Ball is gorgeous. It's the lone reason I want to play Lugia.
Just so you can put a Master Ball in.
I couldn't care about its matchups at all. If I get to draw a Master Ball, I don't even want to play it. I want to not play it. Hopefully, I can set up an Ultra Ball 2 Archeops so I can keep looking at Master Ball during my opponent's turn.
Your day is gonna be: I'm gonna sleeve up Lugia. I'm gonna draw Master Ball. I'm gonna scoop, and I'm gonna go home. It's like, I drew it. There it is. What a pretty.
I like drawing Master Ball, man.
He's gonna draw Master Ball, and he's gonna do everything in his power to try and set up without playing it, and then only play it if it's truly necessary.
Yeah, and then that's exactly the way that Master Balls should be used, right? You just get them, and then you never use them because there's always a better option, and then eventually you stop playing.
I had a great time testing Lugia against one of our locals, Tom. We're proxying up, and luckily one of the guys who had built Lugia had an actual proper Master Ball, and I was testing against Chen Power. I wasn't able to get down double Archeops with the current hand, so I just had to let rip the Pokestop that was on board, and I discarded an Archeops and found Master Ball and was holding Ultra Ball. I was like, you gorgeous card, you've bailed me out. Find the other Archeops so I can send it to the grave and get my Lugia V-Star.
You should have just hit Aroma instead and hit heads.
It's always the wrong one. If I need a basic, it's heads every time. But that'll do it here for the 3rd episode of the Trainer's Mail podcast. Thank you for listening if you've made it this far. And thank you to my co-hosts, Mitch and Jordan, for joining me again this episode.
Oh, you're welcome.
No worries.
Oh, good. And you can check us out on Spotify and YouTube at the Trainer's Mail podcast. We also have social media, but we haven't set anything up really there at Trainer's Mail Pod. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. We'll figure that out
It'll
once we get a fan base built
it's
up.
fine. It's gonna be banned in America soon, so we won't need to worry about it.
Maybe we won't worry about TikTok. But anyways, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.
Bye.